Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, lillahi ta'ala. I praise Allah, I glorify Him, and I thank Him for all the blessings that He gives, without Him being obligated, and I ask Allah to raise the rank of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to protect his Muslim nation. I testify that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah, the one without a partner, the one without an equal, the one without a similar. The one who is unlike anything in the universe, and nothing in the universe is like Him. He has no father, no mother, no sister, no brother, no son, and no daughter. He exists without time and place because He is the creator of time and place. He does not reside above the throne, and He is not attributed with fatigue, like the Jews say. Our Lord is glorified beyond any imperfection that the non-Muslims attribute to Him. Whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah Ta'ala does not resemble that. And whoever attributes an attribute of the creations to Allah is outside of Islam. And I testify that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the son of Abdullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib, the son of Hashim, the son of Abdul Manaf from the tribe of Quraysh, is the best creation of Allah and His final prophet and messenger, sent to all humans and jinn. Thereafter, remind ourselves to have the sincere intention for the sake of Allah in attending this session of Islamic knowledge, because having a sincere intention is a requirement to get the reward. So the Muslim, whenever he does a good deed, he has to have the sincere intention for the sake of Allah to get reward for that good deed. The reward is defined as the compensation in this life among what makes him happy. The sincere intention is for the Muslim to do the good deed, seeking the acceptance of Allah only, and not the praise of the people. So alhamdulillah, we are grateful to Allah that we have been guided to Islam, because it is the greatest endowment, and we are grateful to Allah that we have been guided to have access to the authentic knowledge, the knowledge of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, which is the only way for us to be sure that we are receiving the information that was transmitted to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore he transmitted it to us, conveyed it to us, and so that way we can walk on the straight path. That way we can know how to reach paradise. And that way we can know how to obey our Creator. So alhamdulillah, we're going to continue on with this very famous, widespread work in the Shafi'i school, which is known as Matan Abī Shujā, which is a beginner's book in the Islamic law, according to al-Imam al-Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu, according to his madhab, and according to what his ijtihad was in those matters that he was allowed to have ijtihad. So we're going to continue on with that. We mentioned last time the ghusl, the recommended ghusl, the different ones that there are. And we mentioned that those aren't the only ones, that there's more, but that the author, that he just chose to mention those. And then we started talking about the khuf, which is the footgear that is worn with specific conditions, and it enables the Muslim, instead of washing his feet when he makes wudu, it enables him to wipe on that foot gear, and then he would be able to pray and do whatever he needs to do with purification. So we're going to do a recap of wiping over the hoofs. A recap starting from page 74. Just going to read the method and then we're going to go over some main points. The author, rahimahullah, he said, wiping over al-Khuffayn. Wiping the foot gear, hoofs, is permissible under three conditions. That one starts wearing them after the completion of purification, that they would cover the parts of the foot that are obligatory to wash in wudu, and that continuous walking would be possible with them. The resident wipes for a day and a night, and the traveler for 3 days with their nights. The duration begins from the time one becomes in the state of ritual impurity after wearing the hoofs. If one wiped while residing and then traveled, or wiped while traveling and then resided, one continues wiping as a resident. Three matters invalidate the wiping of the hoof: taking them off, if the period of wiping the hoof ends, and what makes ghusl an obligation. So that's the matan that we read last time, and we were in the middle of explaining that. So basically, we established about the hoof that it is something from the sayings and the doings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that it was so widely known that about this, and about the hoof, that it is tawatur, and that it has reached to the level of it being mass witness transmission. So what does that mean? That means that so many companions, they witnessed and heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam use the khuf or talk about the khuf, that you no longer need to investigate the chains of narration to determine the authenticity of that information or of that news. So we said that it's permissible to use the khuf with three conditions. And when we say using the khuf is permissible, we mean that this is something that Allah Ta'ala has made as a facility. It's something that is easier for the Muslim when making wudu. So if a Muslim is wearing shoes or wearing something that is like the khuf, that has the judgment of the khuf, then when he makes wudu with these certain conditions, he doesn't have to take off what he's wearing on his feet in order to wash his feet. Instead, he can wipe on them. And so it's permissible to apply that in wudu, and that would replace washing the feet. Let's go to footnote 96. It says, yes, to wash the feet is better than to wipe on the foot gear. This is in most cases. However, there are cases where wet wiping on the foot gear is better than washing the feet. An example of that would be if there was not enough time left to pray. But if one wiped on the foot gear, one would complete the prayer in its time. And if one were to remove the foot gear to wash one's feet, one would miss praying the prayer in its time. So this is a nice example of how the Islamic law, how it branches off. So originally, we say, washing the feet is better than wiping the foot gear. And if you were in a situation where you could do both, where you could do one or the other, meaning, that's what I meant, where you could do one or the other, then the better choice is to wash the feet, even if you have the khuf. That's in most cases. But there are some few cases where wiping on the khuf, it goes first. It goes ahead of washing the feet. And so he mentions one. And so this is like an obligatory case. Because in this case, what do you have? You have the person who the time for him to do the prayer without being sinful is limited. And if he were to use the khuf so that he could pray, then he would catch the prayer in the time. And if he were to instead wash his feet, instead of wiping on the khuf, he would miss the prayer. So in this case now, he has to use the khuf. So it becomes an obligation, so it's better. So that shows you the beauty of the Islamic law. Then the author said, so wiping the Khuffayn replaces washing the feet in wudu, but not in ghusl. This is the case whether the wudu is an obligatory one or an optional one. If the conditions are satisfied, one can wipe on the Khuffayn instead of washing one's feet. One needs to wipe both of one's khuf if one has 2 feet. It is not enough to wash one foot and wipe on the khuf of another. It is clear that if one has only 1 foot and the other one is cut off from above the ankle, then it is enough for him to wipe over 1 khuf. So we mentioned last time that if he's going to wipe on the khuf, he has to wipe on both of them. And if he has 2 feet. If he only has 1 foot, then he only has to wipe on 1 foot. And he said, this is obvious. For the length that one could wipe, and we're going to get to that, but for the one who's not a traveler, it's 24 hours. And for the one that is a traveler, it's 3 days and nights, which is 72 hours?
Yes.
Yeah, 72, yeah. For those that are good at math out there. So now we mentioned, last time we mentioned how it can be that it would be valid to wipe on the khuf. So we said that it has to be that the khuf are put on after the purification has been made complete. So after the person makes wudu completely, then if he puts the khufs on, then he can wipe on them. If somehow before he manages to put both khuf on completely, in that case, that person, he has to make wudu again, or take off the khuf, and he makes sure that he's on complete purification, and then put the khuf on again. The second thing we mentioned is for the khuf to cover all the parts of the foot that are obligatory to wash when making wudu. And so that covers the recap for what we did last week. We got up to there, so now we're on condition number 3, page 77, where it says number 3. So this is another condition for the validity of the khuf. For the khuf to be made in a way that one can walk in them in an easy way when wearing them. So for one to wipe the khuffayn, they should be in a way that is easy to walk while wearing them. They do not render walking a difficult matter. So if the khuf renders walking in a difficult matter, that is in the places where people usually walk, such that it is very big, much bigger than one's foot, or very tight, or very thick, like if it was made out of heavy wood or out of iron or copper, then it is not permissible to wipe over it. The distance meant here is what is equivalent to the distance which the traveler walks when he stops to get rest, or when he wants to restart his travel. So in the past, obviously, when someone was traveling, they would get to a certain point where they would rest, and they would get off their animal, and they would make food, and they would pitch a tent, and they would get firewood, and they would get their food ready, etc. So that distance that the person who's traveling, the distance that he would have to cover to get the firewood, to get, for example, some food for his animal, to do whatever he needs to do so he can set up camp, then that is the distance that we're talking about. Like he's taking off, for example, his luggage off the camel. He is searching around for firewood. He is, pitching his tent. He is, let's say, cooking the food, etc., giving his animal to drink. So whatever distance that he needs to walk in order to fulfill all of that, in order to do all of that, is the distance that we're talking about here. Let's look at the footnote 104. It says, halto, which is referring to when the person is, arriving, the traveler, he's stopping to rest, is when one dismounts from travel, and tidhal is to mount for travel. The traveler would be riding an animal, and he would dismount in a place to rest or to gather his needs to continue. The walking back and forth in this case would typically be done in less than 3 days and nights. The type of walking that the person needs to do in order to fulfill these things, this is what the khuf would have to be strong enough to bear. Because if it tears while walking for these needs, to get the firewood, to get the food, to feed the animal, to pitch the tent, then those foot gears would not be suitable to wipe on. So the author said, for example, when he stops to get grass for his animal, or when he stops and he needs to get some water or some wood to put on fire, it does not mean to walk miles or the like. Rather, it is just for the needs of a traveler. Hence, it is understood that the foot gear needs to be strong enough to bear with such walking. The fourth condition, which Abī Shujā did not mention, is for the khuf to be pure, made out of pure material. So if the khuf was made out of the skin of a dead animal, which is maytah, that is, it was not killed in a way that makes it permissible to be eaten, then before tanning it, it is not permissible to wipe on such a khuf. So basically, the material that the khuf are made out of has to be pure. So if that khuf was made from leather, right, that means it was tanned. It means that it was taken, let's say, from a cowhide and it was tanned, the process was done, so it's pure. But if it was made from pig skin, if the material was made from pig skin, then it would not be valid or permissible to wipe on those khuf. And still in some places, or some brands I guess, they do use pig skin. So you have to be careful with that. When the material is made out of pig, then it would not be valid to use for khuf. Now here, we have a note. It says, Jurmuq means a khuf worn on top of another khuf. Sometimes when it is very cold, some people wear one on top of another. So if someone is wearing 2 foot gears, one above another, and both of them are weak, meaning both of them do not satisfy the conditions of the khuf, then it is not permissible to wipe over them, on neither of them. For example, if someone is wearing a khuf that has a hole in it, so here obviously is a typo. If you have the hard copy, it has the word hole with W-H-O-L-E, and it should be H-O-L-E. So, for example, if someone is wearing a khuf that has a hole in it, and it's ripped or it has like a part of it missing, so it should just take off the W. So, for example, if someone is wearing a khuf that has a hole in it next to the big toe, and the one on top has a hole in it next to the heel, then each one of them alone is insufficient to be wiped over. If one looks at that person's foot, one would not see skin. Yet it is invalid to wipe on either of them, on either one of them. If the upper one satisfies the conditions and the inner one does not satisfy the conditions, then it is permissible to wipe over the outer one, but not the one which is inside. Now, in the case that the inner one satisfies the conditions, but the outer one does not satisfy the conditions, if one wipes on the inner one, then it is valid. If one wipes on the upper one, having the intention to wipe the inner one, meaning for the water to reach the inner one, and the water does reach the inner one, then it is also valid. If one wipes the outer one, having the intention for the water to reach both of them, and it does, this is also valid. Likewise, if one does not specifically intend to wipe either of them, neither the outer one, nor the inner one, nor both of them, all that one intended was wiping over the khuf, and so one wiped the outer one and the water reached the inner one, then this is valid as well. However, if one wipes the upper one, having the intention to wipe only the upper one, in this case, this wiping is invalid, even if the wetness reaches the inner one. An example of the aforementioned is if someone wears a shoe that covers the whole foot, including the ankles, and on top of his toe, and on top of his shoe, he wears his socks. So those are 2 khufs. The inner one is good and the outer one is not good. If he wipes the inner one, then it is valid. If he wipes his socks, intending for the wetness to reach the shoes, and it does, then it is also valid, because the purpose of his wiping is for the wetness to reach the foot gear. If he wipes his socks for both of them to be wet, the sock and the shoe, it is also valid. If he wipes his socks thinking about wiping the foot gear, without thinking about which one he was going to wipe, that is, he did not specify in his mind any one of them, and the wetness reaches the shoe, then it is invalid. Now, if he intends just to wipe the sock without thinking at all about wiping the shoe, rather he intends only to wipe the socks, then it is invalid, even if the wetness reaches the shoe. So what is this case here that we're talking about? In the past, they used to wear something that was like a leather boot. So basically, just think of a piece of leather that was fashioned and shaped in the shape of something that you wear on your foot, but not like the shoes that we know today with the hard soles. So basically like a whole and a big piece of leather that was shaped to the shape of your foot, and that was stitched together in a way that it fits around your foot, but without a sole. And not like how you have shoes that have a sole. So just like a piece of leather stitched together to fit around your foot. So that piece of leather that's stitched together that fits around your foot, if it was made out of, let's say, cowhide, and it was tan, so it was pure, and if it covers the area of the foot that you're obligated to wash, And if it's sturdy enough where you can walk around for the needs of the traveler without it ripping, without it coming off, etc. And if you were to pour water on it, the water wouldn't go through, then this is a khuf. Then this boot, right, this leather boot, can be used as a khuf. So now, like we said, it's just a piece of leather that's wrapped around your foot, stitched in the way that it fits around your foot. So let's say that the person, he had two of these on. So he put one on, and then he put one over it. Now, in this case, in this scenario, the author breaks down the different circumstances of the possibilities. So first he started with the easiest one. If both of them, both of those leather boots, if both of them are valid to be used as a khuf, then it doesn't matter which one he wipes, because they're both valid to be used as a khuf. So if he wipes on the one that's on the outside, it's fine. If he wipes on the one that's on the inside, it's fine. Then he says, if the one on the inside is valid, and if the one on the inside can be used, and the one on the outside cannot be used, then in this case, if he wipes on the one on the inside, it's valid. If he wipes on the one on the outside with the intention of wiping the one on the inside and the witness reaches it, it's valid. If he wipes on it without intending anything, without having in his mind that he's intending, this is valid as well. The only scenario where it's not valid is when the bottom one is valid for khuf and the top one is not, and he intends just to wipe on the top one. Moving on, it says, note, in the case that both of them are good, the outer one and the inner one, then one considers the same details as in the case that the outer one is bad and the inner one is good. So if one wipes the inner one is valid. If one only wipes the outer one, intending the outer one only, it is not valid even if the wetness reaches the inner one. The same details apply as if the outer one is not good when wiping, even though both of them are good. One considers the outer one as if it is not good because the judgment of the khuf is an easier judgment because it is needed at large by people, and this is not the case of the jurumuq. So even if it is very cold in a country and people need to wear two khuf, one can still insert one's hand to wipe the inner one. Hence, there is no need to wipe the outer one. This is why it is not treated the same way. So in the case where the one on the outside and the one on the inside are both sufficient for khuf, then the same details apply as if the one on the bottom was valid and the one on the top was not valid. The author said the resident, meaning the one who's not a traveler, wipes for 1 day and 1 night, yani 24 hours. Hence, the one who is not traveling, and muqim, the resident, who does not have the judgment of the traveler, even if he is sinful by this staying of his, he can wipe for 24 hours. So when we say the one who's not a traveler, yani we mean the one who is still within the city limits. He has not left the city limits. Then he says, as for the traveler, he can wipe for 3 consecutive days and nights. So let's look footnote 107. The travel can be short and it can be long. Each have judgments. Some are common among both and some are not. Not all the judgments for the long travel can be applied for the short travel. So one should understand and know if this travel is long or short. Is this a travel that one can combine prayers during it or not? Is this a travel in which the woman can travel alone or not? As soon as one reaches beyond the buildings of the city, it is considered a travel. Now, if one travels a short distance from there, then this is considered a short travel. And if one travels a long distance from there, then it's considered a long travel. The person traveling a long travel can wipe on their khuf for 3 days and nights. As for the one traveling a short travel, one can wipe on one's khuf as the residing person for 1 day and night. So when we say for the traveler, and we're referring to the one who's traveling a long travel. Then the other said, if one is traveling, walking, or he stopped while traveling in a place other than his home, with the intention of staying 3 days or more, without counting the day of entry and exit, he can wipe the footgear for 3 days and nights, that is 72 hours. This is if the distance which he wants to travel is a distance that he can shorten the prayer in. This means the distance covered in 2 days according to the pace of the loaded animal, in a way they used to travel in the past, taking into consideration sleeping, resting, praying, etc. In brief, 48 Islamic miles, or approximately 81 American miles. This person can wipe on the khuf for 3 days and nights. Let's look at footnote 109. As for al-Ha'im, this is the person who does not know where he is traveling to. This person does not know if he is going to make a long travel or a short travel. This person is not considered as making a long travel. So he does not judge for himself that he is making a long travel. And this is a special detail. And you're referring to the person that is wandering. He does not have any destination. So let's say this person, he left his house, he had a backpack on, and he just said, I'm just going to keep on walking. He doesn't have a destination. He's not like going to a specific city, he's not going to a specific place, he's not going to a specific state. He just wants to walk and, journey. So that person, even if he, let's say, walks across the entire country, because he has no destination, he cannot wipe on the khuf for more than 24 hours. And he cannot shorten, and he cannot combine. That's the person that is ha'im. Let's go to footnote 108. He says one can wipe on their khuf for 3 days if their travel is a permissible travel. Whereas if the travel itself is a sinful travel, then one cannot wipe on their khuf for the duration of 3 days. Rather, in this case, one can wipe as the residing person, meaning for 1 day. So, when does this time frame to be able to wipe on the khuf, when does it begin? And it begins when the person breaks their wudu. So let's say the person put on their khuf on Monday, and let's say they weren't traveling, and they kept it on, and they kept their wudu, let's say, for 12 hours on Monday, and then they break their wudu. Now the 24-hour time period starts. Then the other said, an example is, footnote, if in the morning one performed wudu and washed one's feet and wore the khuf and then left the house, and one's wudu was invalidated after praying the Asr prayer towards the end of Asr, then one begins to calculate the duration when one's wudu was invalidated. So the remaining period in Asr until Maghrib, one did not have wudu. If, let's say, one made wudu during the Maghrib time and wiped on the khuf, then one's wudu was invalidated after praying Maghrib and one wanted to pray Isha, so one makes wudu and wipes on the khuf. Then if one slept while wearing the khuf, and when one woke up for Fajr, one performed wudu and wiped on the khuf, then during the Dhuhr time, if one's wudu was invalidated and so one made wudu and wiped on the khuf, Now it is time of Asr. If this person wants to pray before the time that he invalidated his wudu the day before, meaning if he wanted to pray in the beginning of the Asr time, he can make wudu and wipe on the khuf. But if he reached the time in which he invalidated his wudu the day before, which was during the end of the Asr time, then it is no longer valid for him to wipe on the khuf. However, one's wudu was not invalidated. If, however, one's wudu was not invalidated, then one still has a valid wudu. So the wudu does not end with the end of the duration being calculated. And here is another typo. It's there's an A after the L in calculated, the first L in calculated. And that, of course, is a typo, so just delete the L, or strike through on the L. The author said, what ends is the validity to wipe on the khuf. The wudu does not become invalid just by reaching the end of the duration period. What ends is the validity to wipe on the khuf. So in this case, if the calculated duration period ended and one still had wudu and the maghrib time enters, one can wash one's feet to pray the maghrib, so one does not need to redo the wudu. So I like that example, alhamdulillah. May Allah Ta'ala bless whoever put the example. Because basically he's saying and giving a practical application of what it means to 24 hours. So basically we said this person, they put on the khuf, and they woke up in the morning, they made complete wudu, they put on their khuf, and then they set about their day. And they stayed on wudu the whole day until they got to near the end of the Asr prayer. And they're wearing the khuf. So they kept their wudu until near the end of the Asr prayer, and then at that time they broke their wudu. So now what does he do? Because he already prayed Asr, but his Asr is almost over, and then he broke his wudu. Now Maghrib is in. Now he wants to pray Maghrib. What does he do? He makes wudu, he wipes on the khuf, and he prays Maghrib. And then let's say after that, if he broke his wudu again, after praying Maghrib, then when Isha comes in, he just makes wudu, wipes on his feet with the khuf, and then he prays Isha. And then let's say he slept, and while wearing the khuf, and then he woke up the next day and it was Fajr. So he woke up and he made wudu and he wiped on the khuf. And then he continued on with his day, and it was time for the dhuhr. And so if he had broken his wudu, he makes wudu, he wipes on the khuf, and he prays dhuhr. And at the beginning of Asr, say he broke his wudu, so he makes wudu, and he wipes on the khuf, and then he prays Asr at the beginning. Now when he gets to the time near the end of Asr, where the day before he had broken his wudu, now here, once he gets to that point, the time expires. So the time for him to be able to wipe on the khuf ends, but he's already on wudu, because he made wudu and wiped on the khuf at the beginning of Asr, to pray Asr. So now, he still has his wudu, he didn't break it, but the time, the 24 hours ended, so now he has to take off the khuf, if he wants to pray Maghrib, and he has to wash his feet, and then if he wants, he can put the khuf on again, and then he can pray Maghrib. So what the author was saying is that when the 24-hour time period ends, it just means that the time for him to wipe on the khuf has ended, and not that any previous purification that he had done becomes invalid just because the 24-hour time period ended. So that was very beneficial, alhamdulillah. Continuing on from the main text, it says here, This is page 80, and the last paragraph. Shuraih ibn Hani, a companion, came to the Aisha radiallahu anha and asked about the khuf. She said, "Go and ask Ali. He is more knowledgeable than me. He used to travel with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." He asked Ali, and Ali radiallahu anhu said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to wipe 3 days and nights when traveling and 1 day and night when not traveling. This was narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. So this is one of the proofs that we use to confirm that time period or that timeline. And if for the one who's not traveling 24 hours, for the one who's traveling 72 hours. One starts counting the period from the time when one's wudu was invalidated after wearing the khuf. Let's look at footnote 110. The duration of the hadath, ritual impurity, can be short, like passing gas, or it can be long, like sleeping. If one makes wudu and wears the khuf, one begins counting once one invalidates one's wudu. So let's look at footnote 111 as a beneficial detail. This statement implies that one begins calculating the duration at the end of the hadath of the ritual impurity without giving details. Sometimes the hadath is long, like sleeping, and sometimes it is short, like passing gas. Some scholars did not accept this definition. They differentiated between the hadath that occurs voluntarily by choice and the hadath that does not occur voluntarily. The hadath that occurs voluntarily by choice is like sleeping, touching, caressing. The scholars use the word mas to mean to touch the private part, and the word lems to mean to touch a marriageable woman. Some Shafi'i scholars said that one starts counting at the beginning of the hadath if it occurs voluntarily by choice, like for example sleeping, touching the private part, and touching the marriageable woman. And they said that one counts at the end of the hadath if it does not occur voluntarily or by choice, like for example urination and defecation. So if someone said, "I slept involuntarily," this does not change the judgment because sleep is usually done voluntarily. So in the case of what is voluntary, as soon as the hadath occurs, and even if it hasn't ended yet, the time starts. So that's for the voluntary ritual impurity, the voluntary hadath. Let's take the example of sleeping. Once, let's say the person who's wearing the khuf, he goes to bed and he lies down on his pillow and he closes his eyes and he puts the covers on himself and he goes to sleep. The moment that he's asleep is the time where now he invalidated his wudu, and now the time the countdown starts. If he's not a traveler, he has 24 hours from that point. If he's a traveler, then he has 72 hours from that point. That's for the voluntary. Now, for the one that's not voluntary, like urination and defecation, when does the time start to count? When the urination ends. When the defecation ends. So that's when the time starts to count. The author said, if one makes wudu and wears the khuf, one begins counting once one invalidates one's wudu. And so the detail is, for the voluntary impurity, ritual impurity, it starts as soon as from the beginning. For the involuntary impurity, like urination, defecation, when does the time start? When the impurity when the person finishes the urination, when the person finishes the defecation. It says, for example, if one wears the khuf and then urinates, so when one stops urinating, one starts counting 24 hours. One counts from the end of the invalidator of one's wudu. And always be prepared to be asked questions. Because like we mentioned, this is the Islamic law, and for obviously, the ideal is for the one who's sitting in the session to write what he hears as a way of keeping that knowledge preserved. Because when you just listen, for example, let's say after you leave or after that some time has passed, the information a lot of times evaporates. And so the person would be like someone who they heard but they don't know. But in order for that information to become more rooted, if it's written down and preserved, then even if it evaporates, you can always go back to it and refer to it. So next week, inshallah, I'm going to ask you, when do you start counting the period of being able to wipe on the khuf after invalidating the wudu? So the answer would be, they have to say with detail. If it was a voluntary impurity, then you count from when it starts, when the impurity starts. If it's an involuntary impurity, then you count when the impurity ends, and when the, let's say, thing that caused the impurity, when that process is over. And then I'll say, what's an example of voluntary impurity? And you're going to say sleep. And I'm going to say, what's an example of involuntary impurity? You're going to say urination and defecation. The author said, the person whose travel is itself a sin is allowed to wipe on the khuf for only one night. So if a woman is traveling alone without an excuse, another fix, whoever has the hard copy, there's a misspelling and excuse. It should be an S right before the E instead of a C. Maybe that's an Italian spelling. It's E-X-C-U-C-E. Or whether the Italian be with a Z at the end. Right? Scusi. It says, so if a woman is traveling alone without an excuse for a distance of 500 miles, for example, she is committing a sin by this travel. So she can only wipe one day and night. Now, if one's travel is not sinful, but while traveling, one commits sins like drinking alcohol, one can wipe for 3 days and 3 nights because the travel itself is not sinful. Because the travel itself is not sinful. Let's look at footnote 113. It's beneficial. It's a detail, but it's beneficial.
What happened if the travel itself was not sinful, but she went to go commit sins?
That means it's sinful. That means the travel itself is sinful. Okay, the purpose of her travel is sinful.
So that implies that she does travels without hijab too?
Yes. So here, the question was, if the woman travels, let's say, with a mahram, but without a hijab, so her travel itself is sinful. So here the author said, footnote 113, there's a difference between the one who his travel itself is sinful, who is known as al-Asi bi-Safari, the one who is known as al-Asi bi-Safari is the one whose travel is a sin in and of itself. And his travel itself is judged as a sinful travel. Like someone, for example, who is traveling for the purpose of fornicating, or traveling for the purpose of gambling. Like, for example, the person, he wants to travel to Las Vegas to go hit the casino. So the purpose of the travel is to go to the casino. So his travel itself is sinful. So anyone who travels a sinful travel, a travel that in and of itself is sinful, then that person won't be able to use any of the facilities that the religion gave him. Because for the traveler, there's certain things that were made easier for certain acts of worship and certain judgments that were not made, that were not given to the one who's not traveling. Among them is what is like the shortening and combining of the prayers. Among them is what, like if the person is fasting and his travel is before the dawn, according to Imam Shafi'i, then he's allowed to break his fast if he's traveling, whether he's comfortable or not comfortable. And the same thing here for the khuf is if the person is traveling and he's wearing the khuf and then he validates his wudu, then he can wipe on the khuf for 72 hours. So these are facilities, things that are given to the Muslim and to facilitate for him. So, but if he's traveling a sinful travel, if the travel is in and of itself sinful, then those facilities are not given to that Muslim. So this is called al-'asi bi-safari. And then the other one is, he is al-'asi fi safari. So if you know a little bit of Arabic, you understand what a big difference this one change of the letter can make. In one case we have al-'asi bi-safari. In the other case we have al-'asi fi safari. So the author said, al-'asi bi-safari is the one whose travel is sinful. The travel itself is sinful, like the travel to waylay, or the woman traveling without her mahram, with no excuse. With no excuse. In these cases, one is only entitled to wipe, like the residing person, for one day and night. Al-'asi fi safari is the one who commits the sin while traveling. In this case, the traveler can wipe on the khuf for 3 days and nights. The travel itself is not sinful. An example is if one while traveling commits an unlawful look, or ghiba, or namima, or drinks alcohol, or eats maida, or leaves out a prayer while traveling. In all these cases, one commits a sin, but the travel itself is not sinful. So that's the difference. In one case, the purpose for the person's travel is to commit a sin. So his travel itself is a sinful travel. So he cannot wipe on the khuf more than 24 hours. And he cannot break his fast. And he cannot shorten and combine. An example is like the woman traveling without hijab, or the woman traveling without a mahram, with no excuse. Now, in the case where the travel is not itself sinful, like the person that say, he traveled to go to Delaware. He traveled to go to an Islamic seminar. He traveled to go seek the knowledge. He traveled to go to Hajj. He traveled to go do business, halal business. He traveled to go visit relatives. He traveled to go visit his wife. So that's the reason for his travel. It's a halal travel. He traveled for sightseeing. He wanted to go see the waterfalls. He wanted to go see the Grand Canyon, so he drove to the Grand Canyon. So the reason for his travel is permissible, and it's not haram. But while he was traveling, on the way there, he fornicated, or on the way to his destination, he drank alcohol, or he did drugs, or he killed someone. He committed sins. So he can still shorten and combine, he can still wipe on the khuf for 72 hours, he can still break his fast. Because the facility is still there for the travel, even though he committed sins while traveling. Any questions about that before moving on? Before we finish that last part? The author said, if one wiped while residing and then traveled, or wiped while traveling and then residing, one continues wiping as a resident. For example, if a person from Philadelphia wipes on his khuf and then travels, or wipes while traveling and enters Philadelphia before 24 hours end, he wipes for only 24 hours. So if somebody wiped while they were not traveling and then they traveled, or they wiped while traveling and then they became a non-traveler, they continue wiping as a resident. And so the judgment of the wiping for the time frame is when did he wipe. So the beginning is when did he wipe. So if he wiped before he became a traveler, and let's say the person, we're going to catch a flight. Before he got on the flight, he made wudu, complete wudu, and he put on his hoof. But then as he's waiting at the gate, right, he's not a traveler yet, he broke his wudu. Right, he passed gas or he went to use the bathroom. So before his flight even took off, he broke his wudu. So now the time starts, 24-hour countdown. He can wipe on his hoof to make wudu for 24 hours. Because why? Because when he broke his wudu, he was a resident. Now the flight took off, now he's traveling now. Does the judgment change? No, he can only wipe for 24 hours. So that's the first scenario. Second scenario is the person, he didn't break his wudu before the flight. He had the hoof on, complete wudu, put the hoof on. Then he got on the flight took off. Half an hour later, he already traveled that distance, right? Outside of the city limits, the distance was crossed the 81 American miles. So now he's officially a traveler now. So he's in the air, he's traveling. Islamically a traveler. Now he breaks his wudu. So since he's a traveler now, he gets the 72 hours. But then, when he lands, right, his flight lands, and where his flight landed, let's say it was a 4-hour flight, where his flight landed, he plans to stay there for a month. So the moment that he lands, and the moment he enters the city limits of that place, his travel is over. So in this case, how long does he continue wiping? 24 hours. Because now he became a resident. And let's see if we can, no, we'll save the rest for her. It's a long paragraph, and it's a long part. We'll leave it for next class. And we'll start the tayammum, inshallah, next class. We'll finish off the last bit next class, inshallah. And we'll start with the tayammum. Does anyone have any questions about anything that we mentioned?
The hoof that you mentioned that was made out of a leather sock, that's not like the ones that they would have it really, right?
They used to be like longer. Remember, they used to reach like up to the knee or up to the shin. But it could be like that, yeah. Could be like that. And you mean like in terms of design or in terms of like material? Being able to walk around with it. They were usually thicker, But the person, they have to really, pay attention to that issue and make sure that the ones that they do buy, let's say like in the Islamic stores, that they are thick enough for that condition to be satisfied, where they can walk in it for the needs of the traveler. Any other questions?